I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to a special Thursday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. Over the month of December, we reached out to the Minnesota Health Department and said that McFarlane Media Conversations with Al McFarlane would like to connect with agencies, organizations, individuals, and community that are doing the frontline work, educating, promoting, organizing, serving our community, particularly around the state's obligation, its mission to protect us during the COVID-19 crisis, to respond to COVID-19. And we all are aware of the extra impact that Black and Brown communities are experiencing, not only in Minnesota, but around the country. So I'm pleased to be able to reach out to some of the people, some of the agencies that are doing things on the front line to make our communities both aware and to try to dampen the impact on individuals and on families, and to strengthen our capacity to both maintain and move towards resilience and positive outcomes through the pandemic. Well, I'm going to begin by introducing two friends of mine, two people that I know and respect and love, Adrian and Ayolanda Mack. And they have an organization called the Black Family Blueprint that they are bringing to this critical work. Unmute your mic, my friends, Adrian and Ayolanda, and good afternoon, and thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us, Al. It's always good to be in space with you, to learn from you, and to just be able to serve and share with the community through your platforms and your venue. We've been a fan of yours and the paper and the shows for years, ever since we got introduced through the community venue. So we've always followed your work and the way you engage community. So thank you for your work, and we appreciate this opportunity.
Well, we go back a long, long way, and I can tell you that from the beginning, I have always been impressed with both the spirit and the intellect, the intelligence, actually the genius that you, and earnestness that you bring to the study of our community and of the world from the lens of our community and our culture. And so I think it's important, and you continue to do groundbreaking work. So tell me about Black Family Blueprint. Let's start with Black Family Blueprint 101. What's the organization? What's the mission?
Thank you. So our mission really is the preservation of the Black family, by the Black family, for the Black family. And we're really rooted in family life, Black family life, and Black family education. We are really focused on doing work specifically with parents, and we also do work with intimate couples, romantic partners, around what it means to be together, to stick together, to stay together, and to do it in a healthy way. And so we create content for Black families around right now around COVID and health and safety, around child rearing and child development. We're both doulas, so we work with parents who have children all the way from the womb, all the way through adulthood.
And part of the work we do focuses on really building the relationship between parent and child and supporting the family as they move and grow throughout the family life cycle, because families are kind of moves in stages, and we want to make sure that there's healthy growth, development, and support for that stability around the Black family, as well as doing advocacy work and just educational work on a policy level to make sure that we're looking at families from a very strategic way as we implement programs and policies on a state level.
It's examining the family structure from within the Black family, it seems to me, is one way to describe what you're doing. And so what are you discovering as you analyze, as you look at, and as you notate what works and what doesn't work, what the strengths are, but what the threats and dangers are? How do you describe both the status, the condition, and the opportunity for family-ship in our community?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Good
so
question.
so we work in two ways. We work from the internal and from the external. And so we're looking at Black family systems. We're looking at the historical impact on Black families as it relates to parenting, to education, to all of these things, to health, all of these things that impact the Black family, what we are responsible for. We know that we have been really, our necks have been under the knee of this system, right? From the beginning of us being forced over here. And so we look at the impact that that has on the Black family today. And at the same time, we do the external work. So we're doing the internal work with our families, right? And then we're doing the external work, looking at how the macro systemic pieces have impacted the Black family. And so internally, we are looking at parenting practices. We are looking at coupling practices. We're looking at the transition to adulthood. We're looking at the transition to kindergarten. We're looking at birthing babies and how, you know, there's these high levels of maternal and infant mortality with Black women in the Black community, and the things that we need to do internally to address those. And at the same time, looking at the impact that the systems have on Black families and advocating for those as it relates to children and families who are impacted by child protection, looking at the ways in which the child support system can be very abusive to fathers. And so we're looking at, again, those internal systems and what is it like. We believe that we are responsible for our healing. And we also believe at the very same time that the external systems that have really worked against us in so many ways, that we're working within those systems to bring reformation, transformation, and dismantling, if necessary, to those systems.
Get them off our neck, right?
Right, exactly.
Get up, yeah.
Yeah, so all things that impact the Black family from those two lenses, the internal and the external.
And a couple of other things that we found is that we know that Black families, and which has been echoed for the last 5 to 6 decades by different scholars and researchers, is that there's a heavy value on the stability of the Black family within our community, that we prize the institution of the Black family, and we look at the family as the core to being able to help young people transition to a healthy adulthood. And we also look at the Black family as the nucleus for the economic engine of our community and our peoplehood, as well as the political voice of our peoplehood as well too. And so there's, to this day, even in the 21st century, there's this intentional effort and look into the state of the Black family as being the catalyst and the template for us to be able to make transformative changes on how we affect our peoplehood across the board. And so that value is intensively there and something that comes up often in our research and our practice. And we also know that that's connected to parents being intentional with how they want to raise their children, the perspectives that they bring to parenthood, the limitations in their resources that they have, and understanding what child development looks like, what parent development looks like, what healthy relationships look like. All of these things have come up within this practice and really given us information to say that there's more need for us to look at our parental health, family health, and mental health when it comes to building stable families.
So let me ask you to direct the conversation and to explain what you do in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And let me ask you to go a step further, because these are obviously related. There's the COVID-19 pandemic, and then there's the pandemic of 1619, the pandemic of white supremacist control of its effort. And I call it simply an effort, because it's not, I don't call it successful. It's just been a massive effort.
It's a massive effort.
Control and deny opportunity in life. I think that the obvious conclusion, however, will be the emergence of African and indigenous people, despite the oppressive influence and experiment of European colonial, imperial, and what's the other word for it? Cultural domination. But talk about your program in particular. Here's what I'm thinking. I know the way that you all are working is organic, and what you talk about on the small scale, the personal scale, has implications and has representation at the macro level as well. So when you work at a specific small thing, that thing resonates as true in a cosmic way. So blend the conversation about what you do about COVID-19 with how you operate within the pandemic of 1619 white supremacist thought?
Such a good
That's
question.
a real good question. Yeah, we can build on this one. One of the things that one of my colleagues, Thomas Berry, that he's been really advocating, and I'm pretty sure he's borrowing with the sentiments of what the people said, but he's real good at elevating the idea that COVID-19 exposed even more viscerally in 2020 the inherent institutionalized racism and the structure of white supremacy and how it impacts the Black community. And so we know that this has been enacted since the early 1600s, since 1619, and the perpetual institutional development of discriminating and marginalized African Americans, African descendants within this country, who was basically the capital product to produce wealth in this country. The systemic forces to keep a group of people effort to lock them into a certain class position is permanent. And this pandemic exposed that, and it offered more visibility to the inequities and the discrimination around health. It exposed more of the mental health piece. It exposed the discrepancies between employment and unemployment and job stability. It exposed much around the educational resources that families have to make sure that this quality education has been provided in Black homes. It's elevated these things to the surface, let alone the political dynamic and climate that we're in with this crazy administration that's about to transition out, really helped to elevate these things as well too. So the pandemic, in a sense, just put the cherry on the top. And so what this allowed Black Family Blueprint to do is really just start making it, just help drawing the connections. And we're carrying on the traditions that many other scholars are doing right now. We're just learning from other people who's doing this work in a local level and a national level, drawing the connections between how inherent white supremacy structured within the system has created these inequities in programs and lack of resources and opportunities and access that shows up in Black families not having what they need to be able to sustain healthy Black families. And so we're just drawing the connections through education formats. We're pulling up the issues that come up, and we try to draw parallel between a macro experience of what this looked like in our family life and what it connects to that macro level in terms of the systems that impact us. But we also try to make sure that families are empowered with something, with either a lesson, with some resources, or some type of skill set or strategy to be able to affect that. One of my brothers who's working on a program right now is dealing with finances, and he's talking about credit and credit building and how important that is to Black families. I'm giving a shout out to my brother Drew, and he talks about the metaphor that King used a few weeks before he was assassinated, and talking about specifically the disappointment and, you know, the age quote that King says where he feels like he fought to help people to get access to economic opportunities, to get the boots, but they didn't have the boots to be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. I can't remember the exact metaphor, so someone could correct me on that. And for him, he's saying that I like the idea of working with families to be able to do credit building around that and what credit building means in terms of finances and financial literacy. And it's a powerful piece because he's making the metaphorical connection that things like this becomes the resources, the bootstraps that we need to support Black families to deal with the economic disadvantages that has been so institutionalized amongst the families. And so for us, Black Family Blueprint just become a venue to be able to make those connections and to be able to create a venue where we're providing education pieces to it, providing strategies to it, and doing it in a content creative way to allow families to be able to consume it and be able to be directed to the spaces to be able to impact their family life.
Yes.
Okay, well, keep going.
I'm like, yes. And so, you know, we get these big messages from the institutions. And sometimes the messages are so big, and given that so many families are in survival mode, we're all just trying to cope and get through. right now, we don't always have the time to translate
Right.
what all of this stuff means. And because a lot of us are in survival mode, we end up opting out of leaning into the information. And so what we've really been focused on doing is trying to fill in the gaps for our parents, for our essential workers, for those of us who are sick, who are challenged, right, in their wellness, taking these big, broader message and making them into little bite-sized, chewable pieces that will have some type of positive effect within Black families.
And we're also, looking in this work around the pandemic, it's important for us to elevate voices. And one of the voices that my mentor and my elder, he teaches me, Ed Irwin, is that it's important for us to really look at the position of our elders in the midst of this pandemic and making sure that we're being very responsible, listening, being guided, and making sure that there's a connection between the community and our elders. And so elevating voices in the midst of this pandemic becomes so important, because we also have to advocate and speak for our children who are in a vicarious position when it comes to this pandemic and the place that they stand in terms of how this pandemic, this virus affects their body physiologically, and them being in positions where they could be carriers. But how do we advocate for them and elevate their voice, but also at the same time support their awareness and understanding around this pandemic, so they're being very sensitive and careful with how they navigate the world during this pandemic. So a lot of the work we're doing with this as well is just making sure that there's voices being included within the conversation, and how we lean into a lot of discussions to make sure that we have an informed community for the sake of Black families.
And really, it's like, even in our bondage, even in the midst of our oppression and marginalization, we are not helpless and we are not powerless. Even if we're operating from a less equitable amount of power or resources, we're also not helpless in this time. And so it's really about thinking about the ways in which we do have power, and that we can access our power individually and collectively to still come out with our head above the water at the end of the day.
And it's tapping into that resilience. We know that when it comes to resilience and strength and being able to navigate the troubled waters, or the river that Vincent Harding offered us as an analogy, African Americans and African descendants within this country has been instrumental, innovative, powerful, and the narrative and the story of resilience in this country. And so in this type of work that we're doing, we have to tap into those resilient strengths that's so paramount and echoed within our community and within our peoplehood, within our history. And one of the methods that we use, we create online videos called Recentering the Black Family. And we try to always start that off with a quote that is emanating from the resilience of our peoplehood. And that quote is just echoing the history and the voices of our ancestors, and even some of our alive leaders today, to be able to remind us that we're coming from a space and an ocean of resilience. African Americans, African descendants, the Black family is the most resilient institution that America can write about and echo as a monument within this country, because it's survived and it's constantly in a state of reconstituting itself. And so in that sense, we have to make that connection of coming out of this pandemic reconstituted, much more stronger and resilient based on the echoes of our people.
Well, you talked about your website and how you bring these quotes or ideas, and it just made all the sense in the world to drop this quote up. Read that and talk about that in particular.
A necessity for mental and social wellness of Black families. Black Family Blueprint is planting seeds for the wealth of the generations to come. We are all really about leaving a legacy for our children. We talk a lot about historical trauma and how much we've inherited the pain from our ancestors, but we don't always talk about the wellness that we've inherited, the resilience, I believe there's positive and toxic resilience. We don't talk about the positive resilience that we've inherited. And so we're all about leaving a legacy for our children, a legacy of wellness, a legacy of self-sufficiency. We know that health is wealth. And so we have to put these things into place for ourselves when we're thinking about our future generations and the world that they're going to inherit from us.
And so a question I have, because you guys know my grandson, Reggie, right?
Yeah, that's
And
my
so
dude.
the question I have is, how do parents, grandparents, or relatives explain COVID-19 to 3-year-olds, to 4-year-olds, to 5-year-olds? How do you get a 6-year-old to understand the necessity of social distancing, of wearing a mask, and of what almost seems like obsessive hand washing? That's what you got to do right now. And how do you get ourselves and our families conditioned? And if you have an intentionality in educating or making aware or training that child around the dangers associated with COVID-19, is there some lesson in that you use to guide your informing of that child around how we navigate the dangers of the larger pandemic, the pandemic that I described as the pandemic of 1619. We all know about the talk, right? Of Black parents having to have the talk, particularly with Black boys, but increasingly Black boys and Black girls, how they navigate and become safe and manage the oppression, the oppressive environment. So what do you think? How do we, what are you doing in a Black Family Blueprint to encourage, enable, support parents in explaining the trauma that we're all experiencing through COVID-19?
Yes, this is a hard conversation. And we have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old at home. We were homeschooling our 10-year-old. He's been homeschooled for a few years now. And our 7-year-old was in traditional school. And so the 7-year-old who's in 2nd grade experienced the most transition from leaving his regular day-to-day at school. And so at first, we let him know there's this thing. It's like a really nasty germ, and it's called COVID-19. And these are the ways that COVID-19 can be passed. So we try to give them little bite-sized pieces of information in their language that they can understand. From there, then it's explaining we have to be this far apart. Let's count out 6 steps. Let's reach out our hand, and count out 6 steps so that we know how far we are away from each other. We have to wear our mask. And so we've just been it's been constant coaching. It's not a talk. It's a consistent talk. And it's also creating opportunities for practice of those skills of hand washing, sanitizing, wearing your masks, social distancing, constant practice. And really, it's really about leaning into the emotions that our children are feeling around the disruption of their day-to-day. When our children are used to being able to spend time with their grandparents, they're used to seeing family and friends, they're used to going to school. When your child says, I miss my auntie, you got to say, I know, I miss them too, and I feel sad. Do some emotional coaching and bring out those emotions and help them put words to the emotions that they're feeling and join with them and help them understand that you're missing them too, and that this is only a short time. And while we're in the short time, there's things that we can do. We can talk on the phone. We can have video calls. We can look at pictures. We can draw pictures for them or put something in the mail. We can make them a gift. Let's do some things to remember our friends and family that we're missing and consistently lean into that emotionality part of it. I think that oftentimes, especially in our community with this children are to be seen and not heard, we end up kind of stomping on the emotions that they feel, and they begin to internalize things like this pandemic in unhealthy ways. And so we have to have the conversation. And as parents, we have to be willing to say, it's okay to feel sad about it right now. I feel sad about it too. We just did a video with our 10-year-old who is really struggling. This is our homeschool child, but he had lots of extracurricular activities to keep him socially engaged. And so he's really missing out right now. And so we let him get in front of the camera and do a video about his emotions around COVID. And he's like, I'm sick and tired of COVID. He's like, it's been days, weeks, months, and I miss my family and my friends. And he says, but my mom taught me how to count my blessings, and he says, this is what counting your blessings mean. And then he says, and my dad teaches me about affirmations. I am beautiful, I am powerful, I am strong. And so giving our children those words to really express their emotions around this and letting them know that this is a short time, and this is the reasons why we have to follow the guidelines around social distancing and wearing our mask and washing our hands so that we can stop and slow and eventually stop the spread of COVID-19. So then they know that they're actually helping, that they're big helpers in putting an end to the pandemic, and that they have some power in that.
And just a small piece to add into that, or to accent with what you said, my wife, is that part of that teaching and just kind of guiding them through this process is role modeling and doing it with them. As we know, when we connect with our children, if we attune and try to balance with them, they follow our lead. They're very sensitive to our nervous system. They watch our face expressions and the affect on our face. And so there's a lot we have to do around our mental health and our stability in order to guide our 3-year-old and our children, young children, to being able to adjust to this temporary experience right now. And so if we're balanced and kind of in place, they're going to follow our lead. And we're introducing these new routines and these new methods to connect with grandma and grandpa. We're going to be connecting with family in this way. And if we go in it with a more kind of excitement and more enthusiasm and recognizing, again, affirming our current feelings, but being able to process this through this new practice, this new ritual or routine, they're going to embrace it a lot more because mom and dad is doing it. Our son, he's counting his blessings because mom is counting her blessings. If my son is doing affirmations because I'm doing my affirmations because I need those in the morning. And so he's following my nervous system, like my brother Resma Menakem always say, following my nervous system, and he's feeding off of my sensitivity and my emotional state, and they tend to follow suit that way. And that's sometimes one of the best ways we could teach our students, our children, is to be able to model it and do it with them.
That's wonderful. I was going to ask you to give some examples, but the one you gave is just perfect. And it suggests that it's possible, it's doable, that you simply need both the tools and be prepared to engage in a way that recognizes, the uniqueness of the child, number one, his or her humanity, and that brings your humanity in alignment, and also your responsibility delivered through that as a steward and as a person responsible for the development of that human being, supporting that human being's development. So let me ask you about couples. You say one of the things you do at Black Family Blueprint is talk about what it means to be a couple, or how the couple exists in our communities. I think we don't talk about that enough. I'm glad to know that you're doing that, but I think we do not, with intention, talk about what it means to be a couple in our community. So I'm going to just have you address why that's one of the things you do, and tell how you do it, what it is you do, and at the same time, put that in the context of COVID-19, and put it in the context, as I said before, of the pandemic of 1619 as well.
Woo! Okay, so that's a good one too. So
I don't know if we got enough time for that. Yeah.
So we're kind of a young couple, but we've been together for a long time.
Yeah.
And there was no blueprint for us figuring ourselves out in terms of our intimate partnership.
You don't look like you're in your 20s. I know you got older kids, so 20s is not right, but you guys are remarkably beautifully preserved. Okay.
Thank you.
No, we've been, it's almost 20 years for us. We've been together for a long time, and we met young. And because we met young, we really didn't have a blueprint for how to be with each other. We didn't necessarily come from the most together homes or nuclear families, right? So we had a lot that we had to figure out. And so in the midst of our journey, our intimate journey together, we created a lot of tools for ourselves to get through the tough moments. And so we created a program called Intimacy of Blackness, specifically for Black couples who specifically have the history of enslavement. And it's really around looking at the ways in which we've been hurt, we've been traumatized, we've been oppressed. by this country, and all the ways in which that's impacted our family and our ability to be intimate with one another, our ability to be open and trusting and trustworthy and honest with each other. We find that people end up in relationships and still lack a lot of intimacy. And so our piece is around looking at Black love and how Black love is a look, but Black intimacy is the function of the Black love that will sustain a relationship. And so back to the first pandemic, the 16-19 pandemic, really looking at the ways in which it's really hurt us as a people and it's really disrupted our ability to connect and be intimate. And then looking at our current lived experiences and how all of these the complex compounding traumas that we've experienced have gotten in the way of the preservation of the Black family. Looking at looking at the Black marriage rates. At one point in time, African Americans had the highest marriage rates, higher than European Americans in this country, and how it's consistently dwindled. And again, back to the preservation of the Black family. And so in COVID-19, what we do know is that domestic violence is at an all-time high. Breakups are happening. There's a lot of inter-family and inter-community violence happening in intimate relationships. And so we have to look at the ways in which we've been disrupted in our intimacy patterns and kind of dig down into the work that we need to do within ourselves and within our intimate partnership to be able to heal one another. We believe that intimate relationships have the ability to heal. We often hear about intimate relationships being like all the horrible things that go into being in a relationship. He ain't no good, she ain't no good, she this, he that. But there is also an aspect of healing that can happen when you're in an intimate relationship. And so we are focusing on how do we use one another's nervous systems to heal, to see those parts of ourselves that we wouldn't see if we were in a relationship, and digging in deep and doing some of that deep internal work to preserve to build intimacy and to preserve our families.
The current pandemic put a deeper, much more stronger pressure on the complications that exist in a lot of our couplings and our marriages and our relationships and some of our deeper connections. And what we understand with that is that because of the economic challenges over the last 7-8 months, because of the employment situation, because of the close proximity and the social distancing and not being able to go out and carry on our normal routines, it's created a lot more time spent with our loved ones and our people that we're in a relationship with. And so it elevates some of those things that we tend to mask, distract ourselves away from when pre-pandemic. Oftentimes we go to work 6-7 hours out the day, and we have kind of a distant relationship between some of those things that are complicated in our relationship.
Yeah, those coping patterns.
We might have a routine where some of these things may fall just a little bit under the radar, and it may carry on without being fully addressed and brought up. Well, the pandemic forced a lot of those things to unfold. The closing of different mediums that allowed us to either chemically distract ourselves away from it, or to socially distract ourselves away from it, is surfacing. And so it's important, very important at this point, to put a concentration and deep attention on some of those meaningful connections that's within our home, specifically around the coupling and relationship and marital experience, and really addressing what are those communication patterns. Looking at our identity as a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or girlfriend, in that, looking at our attachment experience and what that means from the socialization of our own families and how that comes forward. And especially what I love from my brother Resman, who talks about pain within our experience, the trauma, and how the pain shows up in either dirty pain or clean pain, and how a lot of that dirty pain that he talks about begins to blow at each other in this much critical time of this pandemic, and what we need to do to attentively address that and begin to do that internal work that we need. And so our attention towards couple for us is like the foundational piece of being able to set the stage for a healthy Black family. If you got two individuals that are on the trajectory of a healthy relationship and have the tools, the strategies, and the understanding of themselves and their own experience and what they bring to that coupling experience, it's going to set the stage for a much more healthier family development as they begin to move into parenthood and to later stages into their family life. And so putting a lot of attention on our couples and the intimacy development of our couples really sets the stage for healthy families for the future.
Absolutely.
So talk about those transitions from coupling to marriage, marriage to the act of building, creating families. How do you sort of map out activities or strategies to enable, empower, to create a roadmap for a blueprint, that's the right word, for people to move through those progressions in life?
Yes. So with Intimacy of Blackness, the first thing that we do is we have a discussion around what happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
We ground ourselves together. We use safe physical touch to attune to one another, to really create an emotional connection. And then we have a conversation around what happened to Black men, what happened to us in the middle path, what happened to us before the middle passage, like our process of getting here. What happened in the process of getting here? What happened when we first arrived on these shores and we had to learn a new language and we were being abused and we were in indentured servitude? And what did our relationships look like? So we kind of dig into this broader historical piece first and try to imagine what rituals existed between Black couples as they were coupling and creating intimate relationships in the name of survival. And so we talk about that from an external perspective first, and then we bring the conversation more into an internal conversation around what do we understand about intimacy? What level of intimacy do we really experience? Have we ever been taught to be intimate with one another? I used to be a sexual health educator for young people, for middle school and high school students, and we taught abstinence. We never taught intimacy. We never taught that it was okay to have safe, close physical proximity, to have safe conversations with people without having sex. And so often relationships, there's a lot of physical intimacy and a complete lack of emotional intimacy. And so we take a journey into what it feels like and looks like and what our barriers are to being emotionally intimate with one another. And so we do that through looking at our the messages that we received about intimacy from our parents, from our family around us, and what ideas and thoughts that we have, what fears that we have around intimacy, what gets in the way of us being able to be truly open with our partner, and just kind of digging into that. But we use rituals. We use rituals such as the affection tone. So we have quizzes. What is your affection tone like? How do you like to be loved? Like, what does love feel like? What does it look like to you? We have a code of ethics for Black intimacy that gives couples something like a roadmap that they can use to figure out if they're really operating from an ethical perspective within their marriage. We use meditation and prayer and affirmation, and suggest that couples really begin to implement these pieces in their home. They say, the family that prays together stays together. And so we're not just looking at prayer, though. We're looking at real rituals that use the senses, that use the mind and the body, and even food and taste, touch, smell, like use all of these senses to begin to build up a level of intimacy that feels safe. What we found is that for a lot of people, intimacy does not always feel like a safe place. And that's rooted in our historical trauma. And so we have a lot of protections that we put around ourselves. Even in the midst of relationships, we have protections that we put around ourselves that won't allow us to fully be connected with our loved one. And so it's really about looking at the ways that we can override those protections that we put up for ourselves, and understanding that at one point in time, those protections were important for our people, that those protections are what allowed us to survive. and also allowed us to thrive in the midst of in the midst of a dehumanizing era of our history. And that lives, those protections live in our bodies, and now we have to be conscious of what they look like for us so that we can override them and allow ourselves to truly have an intimate experience with our partner.
And in terms of the family institution, that work is the pre-stage. That's the pre-stage set in the perspective of the family development. Yes. It's hard to, especially when it comes to the Black family, because of the dynamic nature of how we support each other in a system of family life in America. Trying to chart and kind of map out the stages of Black family development is a little difficult because we tend to be at different stages at multiple times. Right. But we do try to put an emphasis on looking at the parents, the Black parents moving into their child, the first child, second child, and third child. And we have a workshop called Birthing Black Child, Birthing the Black Child.
Building the Black Child.
Yeah, yes. Building the Black Child, but it's really titled Birthing the Black Child, where we put a deep experience, a deep look into what is the birthing experience that we want for our children. And after that birthing experience, how do we look at postpartum health for the mother and the father? How do we begin to set the stage for new rituals or rituals to be incorporated into the family so that way the child is growing up in a healthy, nurturing environment that brings in ethnic development early, looking at identity early, looking at the educational blocks early. So we're working with parents to be able to set the environment in their home to be able to set the stage for that child's growth, development, and success, not only in education, but in their personal identity. So that way we're looking at healthy, stable development for that child in their brain and their body. And then from there, we have a intensive workshop on Black Safe, called Black Secure Attachment for Empowerment. And that looks at the stages of Black family life as the child grows through early childhood, the teenage years, the young adult stage, and moving into the transition stage when we're launching our children into adulthood. And there's particular points within those family stages that are important for the developmental task of that child and for that parent. And we look at the parenting style and the transitions and supporting that child and supporting that family to be able to create responsibility, accountability for the growth of that child, and what are the obligations for us to be able to make sure that that child is being provided for, building entrepreneurial understanding, making sure there's a concealed development of their identity, making sure there's advocacy for their educational process, making sure they have the resources to be able to creatively express, and what is the parent's role and obligation. And then we're in Black Safe, we're also looking at the importance of a comfortable, secure attachment in the midst of that, so that the child is transitioning, knowing that they can trust a loved one and then trust themselves as they move throughout the stages. And as we all know, there's a certain point in stage where our children start to smell themselves a little bit. They start to feel themselves. Is that an important stage in development? And it is. And there's certain things in order to survive and to get through some of the harsh systemic circumstances that we've been in as a family, we've incorporated certain patterns of interacting with our family dynamic that has also been kind of negative, aggressive, and not to the development of our children and for the family stability. And we're addressing that. We're looking at that in Black Safe to see, is that something that we need to be incorporating now, or are there alternative strategies, such as around teaching and discipline, and how we communicate affirmation? How do we affirm our children versus constantly bringing up the negative qualities about themselves? And how do we support certain perceptions of themselves as they move through different stages? How do we make sure that there's open and healthy conversations about sexual health and the developments of their physiological as they experience social experience with their peers and stuff, and making sure that parents are ready to equip and incorporate that type of conversation and have it in a healthy way. And of course, in the midst of these stage developments of families, we're also mindful of our experience of being African descendants, being Black in a white, violent, hostile society. Yes. We're also looking at how we transfer some of these messages from the social experience into our family home, and the importance of protecting our children from some of these subliminal and overt messages of whiteness within our broader society. And so a lot of this have to interplay within family development as we support our children in that attachment process and that developmental process, going through different stages of their family life. And hopefully at the end of this, we're building on healthy adult relationships between the child, the parent, and supporting families as they move into elderhood, which is something we're exploring more with Black Family Blueprint, learning from you, learning from our elders in the community on what does elderhood look like, what does grandparents look like, and how does that work within the family dynamic, and what do we need to learn to make sure that we're keeping a healthy trajectory in how we support families and our elders and our young adults moving into that deep reciprocal relationship and love and reverence for our elders and our seniors in our community. So that family stage is a constant work, and we're always looking at the macro and the micro and looking at the development of the child as a nucleus, but setting the pre-stage of that with the healthy relationship dynamic of that intimacy between the couples.
Because I'll just quickly add that what we see with research is that once couples have children, divorces and breakups happen quickly, sometimes within the first year. And so this piece around having that tight intimacy within a romantic relationship is really, really important as it relates to child rearing. Again, we are about the preservation of the Black family. And so that's around finding solutions to the troubles, the barriers and the challenges, the conflicts that we run into when you have two people who deeply love each other, and then they have a child and they realize that they have two total different perspectives on what it means to raise a child, especially around discipline. That will break will break a couple up really quick. And so that is why that's why they go hand in hand, the parenting and then also the romantic relationship.
This is such an easy interview. You guys are a delight. This is a delightful interview. This is wonderful because you got so much to say and you say it with such clarity, and it's enjoyable to both listen to it, to hear it, and to feel it at the same time. And so as you're talking, I'm smiling, but the question that comes to me is to have you articulate the theory that guides your approach. What is the concept? What is the philosophy out of which you have developed these strategies for the family, for Black couples, for an appreciation and the pursuit of sustainability in our community? So what's the framework here?
Oh,
so
there's many.
There's a lot.
There's quite a few.
So Adrian and I taught we were teaching parent education classes that were just about child development. And Jamar Clark was killed on the day that we had a parent class. And we dragged ourselves in, and the parents dragged themselves in. And we were all so down about what happened. And we were like, you know what? We're not going to do our regular curriculum, which will teach you how to talk to your 2-year-old. Like, we're not gonna have that. Like, let's talk about what we really need to talk about here. And parents said, I just need to know how to have this conversation with my children. I don't even know how to even be right now. And so then the following year, Philando Castile was killed. And it was on the same day that we had a parenting class again. Like, this whole thing was repeated over again. And it was like, wow, we have to have a blueprint. We have to have something related to child development that helps parents have these conversations with their children without traumatizing them, without giving too much information too soon. We have to figure out a way to be able to do this. And we have to really be able to work with ourselves really, and work with other parents around how to how to do it from a holistic perspective, how to do it from a space of self-care, how to be able to put our emotions on the table in a healthy way with our children and have these conversations. So at the same time, we were both in a family science program, getting our degrees in family science and really learning the research around family lifespan and family development, again, which was totally unrelated to Black families. And so we had to take our lived experience. We had to really combine that with our community experience, with the families that we know, and create something that would be beneficial to Black families. Research shows that even with parent education classes, you can see young parents who engage in parent education classes through the state. Black parents, Black mothers don't have the same outcomes as mothers do in other racial and ethnic categories. And so there's something about being able to do family work for Black families, by Black families, that we believe will have an astronomically positive impact than would a regular traditional white Eurocentric curriculum. And so that's what we set out to do, really, was to say, like, we know this is real. There's a few models around the country, but we really exist to be a model around how you do Black family engagement to increase positive outcomes within Black communities. And so we have this research basis, evidence-based practice in terms of how we engage, but the content that we use really comes from a historical perspective that we've had to take, knowing our historical perspective, researching our historical perspective, and blending that with these Eurocentric models of family engagement and family development to come up with something that that will actually work and garner the outcomes that our families deserve.
But because we study this, practice this, and had to use a lot of this for our own personal growth, there's so much of the literature and the research that we've had to incorporate within some of the modules and some of the content that we've created. And just the backdrop of us being in school around this and trying to study this as well, a lot of the earnest effort around learning these things came from us trying to practice this and figure this out for ourselves. But once we got into the research, started going to school for this, of course, all of these different models, both Eurocentric and then a lot of contributions from African-American scholarship come to play into this. The multi-contextual framework model, social learning theory, looking at the attachment theory, looking at the critical race theory, which was a key piece in understand how racism really impacts everybody within white supremacy and the structure of white supremacy, looking at the relational maintenance strategies, looking at adult learning theories to where we're incorporating and building right modules that really speak to the way adults learn in this everyday political economy. And just so many different concepts, models, and theories that has informed a lot of what we do. A key stake of what we do around intimacy of Blackness lands in the hands of our dear brother, Resmaa Menakem, in his book, My Grandmother's Hand, which was so it's a powerful read that brings in neuroscience, that brings in the conversations of trauma, and just really talk about the historical lens of how our bodies hold so much of the pains and experiences of our previous generations. And looking at how models like that, especially transformational models that go back to like Naeem Akbar, and looking at Wade Nobles, and looking at how transformation stages of identity development and manhood development informs the way we show up in certain experiences within our relationship. These models, concepts, and theories are kind of like the foundation of how we've incorporated, thought about, discussed, and have exchanged with numerous articles about how to inform some of the content that we pull together. And so there's so much that goes in a backdrop where we're spending hours, days, weeks looking at certain literature and trying to chew it up and figuring out if this works for us. And there's a lot of conversation that happens with elders and colleagues in the community to bounce things off of the community to see how does this make sense for us? Because there's a lot of models that are specifically generalized for white middle-class American families,
Yes.
and they don't pertain to us. And so we have to deconstruct that stuff to see if is there something good that do work for us being westernized within this experience, but how do we bring in the cultural and social experience of Blackness to inform whether or not this holds up for us or not. So there's a lot of background work in the content that shows up that we put together. And so that kind of forms how our theory and practice and some of our own social research shows up in the work that we do.
Listen, this has been wonderful. It's been an hour already. It goes so quickly.
Oh, wow.
So I'm gonna stop it here.
Oh.
What that tells me is that we got to come back because I have more questions to ask you. I'm particularly interested in your sense of data-driven decision making, the value of research. You've mentioned the word research a lot in the course of this conversation, and I think that's illustrative of your methodical and intentional path or intent to do assessment, to examine what is, document what is, and then study what is, and then make recommendations of what we can do based on a thorough examination, of the condition, the opportunity, the challenge, et cetera. So I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about the question of what the future may be as you envision it. The work that you're doing, how it propagates throughout the culture. And as it propagates throughout the culture, what is the consequence? What and how transformation will occur? And as transformation occurs, what will be the outcome? What society will we have authored by our intent and by our life? So we'll come back to that. This is the beginning.
Yes.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yes, sir.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My thanks to Yolanda Mack and Adrian Mack, dear friends, young elders in the community, young leaders, young visionaries, workers, warriors. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for just being here today. We'll continue this conversation later. If you're listening on YouTube or Facebook, we want you to like it, share it. We want to grow an audience here on YouTube, but also expand our reach through Twitter, through social media like Facebook and the other social media platforms. And you can help us. You can help us and be part of this. I think this is a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. We're doing this program every day, 7 days a week, talking about COVID-19 through the end of the year, December 31st. So if you have a particular interest in understanding and analysis of Black people, our approach, how we are impacting, affecting, saving our communities and ourselves, be here with us every day at noon generally. A couple of days we'll do 1 o'clock, but usually at noon. And we do that with the support of the Minnesota Department